Straight Life by Art and Lori Pepper. This is episode 18 of Straight Life. In episode 17, Art was an MP in London during World War II. In episode 18, the war is over. He's 20 years old and begins his life as an adult. This episode is pornographic. Nothing kinky, but I believe the girl was underage. When I came home, Patty was staying with my dad and my stepmother, Thelma. And when I came to the door, my daughter Patricia was there. She was walking and talking. She didn't respond to me. She was afraid of me. I resented her, and I was jealous of her feelings for my dad. Naturally, she'd been with them, so she didn't feel about me the way I wanted her to. And that started the whole thing off on the wrong foot. I was bitter about the army and bitter about them making me have a kid I didn't want, bitter about being taken away when everything was going so good. I was drinking heavily and started using more pot and more pills, and I scuffled around and did a casual here and there or a couple of nights in some club, but nothing happened, and I was getting more and more despondent when finally, by some miracle, Stan Kenton gave me a call. Stan Kenton was incredible. He reminded me a lot of my dad, Germanic with the blonde straight hair. He was taller than my dad. I think Stan was about 6'3", slender, clothes hung on him beautifully. He had long fingers, a long, hawk-like nose, and a very penetrating gaze. He seemed to look through you. It was hard to look him in the eye, and most people would look away and become uncomfortable in his presence. And just like my dad, he had a presence. When he spoke, people listened. He was a beautiful speaker, and he had the capacity to communicate with any audience and to adapt to any group of people. We would play some little town in Kansas, and he'd talk to the people and capture them completely. We'd be in Carnegie Hall, and he'd capture that crowd with another approach. We'd be at the Cavacos in Washington, D.C., a jazz club filled with the black pimp-type cats and the hustling broads and the dope fiends, and he'd capture them. He would observe, study the people, and win them. One time, we did City of Glass at the Civic Opera House in Chicago. It was written by Bob Grettinger, a revolutionary composition, an incredibly hard musical exercise. It was a miracle we got through it. Bob conducted it, a tall, thin guy, about 6'4". He looked like a living skeleton conducting, like a dead man with sunken eyes, a musical zombie. He took us through it, and he finished, and he turned around to the people, and he nodded, and the people didn't do nothing. The place was packed. We'd played the shit out of this thing, and now there wasn't a sound. They didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. I'm looking at Stan, and I'm thinking, well, what's going to happen now? What's he going to do now? Stan looked at the audience. I saw his mind. You could see it turning. And all of a sudden, he leaped out into the middle of the stage, gestured at us to rise, swung his body around again to the audience, and bam! They started clapping, and they clapped and clapped and clapped, and then they stood up with an ovation that lasted for maybe 5 minutes. He did it all himself. Stan did it with this little maneuver. Once, when I was interviewed for Downbeat, they asked me about Stan. And I told the interviewer, if Stan had entered the field of religion, he would have been greater than Billy Graham. and Stan didn't like it. But he didn't understand it. Maybe he thought I was putting him down. Maybe he thought I was belittling religion and ranking him for being a phony. But that wasn't my intention. I was talking about his strength. He was the strongest man I ever met. I traveled with the band. Shelly Mann was playing drums. Connie Condoli was playing trumpet. Bud Shank was in the sax section. June Christie was singing. Lorindo Almeida was playing guitar, and I was featured with the band. We played a lot of different places, and I was getting a name, a following. At first, Patty came along with me, so it was fun. But one day in New York, while we were working at the Paramount Theater, Patty got a telegram from my father saying that Patricia was sick. I don't remember what she had. I didn't even pay attention to it. I was so angry. To me, it was as if Patricia had gotten sick purposely to rank things for me. So Patty left, and that was it. For all intents and purposes, that was the end of our marriage. Patty started feeling it was her duty to stay with Patricia. It was impossible to take Patricia with us. We tried to take her once to Salt Lake City. We drove instead of traveling on the bus. I bought a car, but all the oil ran out of the car and we got stranded, and then Patricia got sick. It was impossible. It was too impossible. The mileage we had to cover was too demanding. They both went home and I sold the car, and that was the last time Patty was on the road with me. I really became bitter then because I was so lonely and I couldn't stand not having a woman. There were chicks following the band that were very groovy, that really dug me. They'd send notes and hit on me and wait for me after the job. But I'd rarely have anything to do with them because I felt so guilty when I did. In 1948, we were playing the Paramount Theater again in New York. Vic Damone was the single attraction. Sometimes we'd play 7 shows a day, and there were a bunch of young girls who used to come around to all the performances. One day, after a show, 4 of these girls came backstage and left a note. They wanted to meet me. I went to the stage door and said hello to them. I brought them into the dressing room and talked to them. They were 16, 17. They said they wanted to form an Art Pepper fan club. Would I mind? I thought they were joking at first, but they were serious, so I told them no, I wouldn't mind, that I'd be flattered, but I couldn't understand what a fan club would entail. We had just started at the Paramount. I think we played for 13 weeks, and it was jam-packed. I was living at a hotel on 47th and Broadway, and these girls kept coming around, so I'd take them out. We'd go to the drugstore. I'd buy them sandwiches, and they took pictures of me. They were fairly nice looking, and they must have been from the Bronx because they all had that accent. Finally, they told me that they really cared for me, that they had a crush on me, and they would like to, they'd work it out among themselves and come and visit me one at a time. I said, okay, but I was thinking they're pretty young. And I didn't know for sure if that was what they wanted. The next day, the one they had elected president of the club was at the Paramount after the first show. This was in the morning, and we had 2.5 hours between shows. She said, "Shall we go to your place?" The president was about 17. She looked Jewish, and she had a slender body, but nicely shaped. She had pretty eyes. She was the most attractive of the 4, with lovely skin, dark coloring. We left for the hotel. The guys in the band were watching, giving me those looks. The president was really enthused. She had a pretty dress on, and her eyes were all lit up. Her whole manner had changed. She'd suddenly become sexy and sure of herself, and very womanly. We got out of the theater, and it was chilly, so I helped her on with her coat. And that was the part I felt bad about. Because when I'm with a woman and I'm very polite and mannerly, it becomes like a love situation. And I felt guilty when I put her coat on. And then she clutched my arm, and it was as if we were lovers. I was hoping we could have got to where we were going without all these formalities, walking on her right on the sidewalk, helping her across the street. It was too cold to walk to the hotel. Ordinarily, it was a nice walk, and I had hoped it would relax us, although she seemed completely relaxed. I hailed a cab and opened the door for her, and there was another little pang. We walked into the hotel, and I really felt strange. I started feeling that the house detective was watching, or the guy at the desk. Walking from the elevator to the room, I thought, what am I letting myself in for? Maybe this is some sort of weird plan to blackmail me or take pictures. Maybe somebody is going to break in and beat me up. I remembered all these stories I'd heard about people being in the big city and getting taken. There were a lot of young people mixed up in terrible crimes. We got to the room. I closed the door, locked it. My heart was pounding, and I was almost to the point of telling her, let's forget it. But I had gone too far to stop, and I had been away from Patty for a long time, and I was going to be away from her for 5 months more. And the girl seemed so clean and nice. I had a bottle in my room, a bottle of vodka. I poured some in a glass and some orange juice. I asked her if she wanted a drink. She said, just a little one. I drank mine down and then took a big straight shot of the vodka. She's just standing there waiting for me. She still got her coat on. I took her coat and hung it in the closet. She's still standing there looking at me with this adoring look. And at last, the feeling that was coming from her, this admiration, started getting to my ego, and I began to relax. But I didn't know exactly what to do yet. I didn't want to do anything that would spoil it, make a mistake, or seem foolish. I sat down on the bed and started making small talk. It's a shame this isn't a nicer place, but being on the road, we just have to take a little place like this because all we do is sleep in it. She just kept gazing at me. I rattled on and on, nonsense, talking and talking. All of a sudden, she sat down next to me, put her hand on my arm, and she said, "You're the most beautiful man I've ever seen." She had her hand on my arm and her head on my shoulder. I put my arm around her and she shuddered. I could feel her whole body vibrating. She had short sleeves on her little dress. It was a jersey dress, and you could feel her body through it. I rubbed her arm with my hand, and she shuddered and pushed herself up against me. She put her hand on my leg, and I immediately got an erection. She smelled good. A lot of times, I've been out with a woman that looked good, but when I got close, her hair didn't smell nice, or her breath, and it would turn me off because it would seem like she wasn't clean. This girl smelled good. Her hair had just been washed, and she was so soft. There was no mistaking at that point what was going to happen. I bent down and turned her chin up so I could kiss her, and she started to squirm and tremble. I probed gently in her mouth with my tongue, and I could tell she was really inexperienced. But little by little, she relaxed her mouth till I could feel the tip of her tongue touching mine. We kissed for a long time. I started kissing her eyes and everything, and she just flipped out and lay back on the bed. I put my hand on her leg and started rubbing really easy. She had stockings on, but she had them rolled, which has always turned me on. I pulled her dress up. Her skin was beautiful. I bent down and kissed her leg just above her stocking, and I ran my tongue around her leg. She started moving and grabbing my hair. I looked at the crotch of her panties. They were soaking wet. She had a great smell. I started kissing the outside of her panties. I don't know if she'd ever had anybody do that before because she really wigged out. She started murmuring things. "I love you." I stuck my tongue inside her panties where her lips were, and it was so moist. I rubbed my tongue up all around her, and then I pulled back her panties so I could get at her. I licked her really slowly, and she started quivering, and she grabbed hold of me, and she came immediately. Almost as soon as I put my mouth on her, she came. Then she said, "Wait a second." She said, "My mother will see my dress." She got her dress off and her bra, and she was really beautiful. She had small breasts, but the nipples were hard, and she was very cute. I started to take my clothes off and got everything off but my shorts, and they were just standing out, and she said, "Come here." And she sat on the edge of the bed and pulled me over to her and started caressing me through my shorts. And then she pulled them down real slow until my joint popped out. And she put her head against it and hugged me and put her arms around me and rubbed her face and her hair against me. And she started licking me. I could tell she didn't know how to suck on me. She just kissed it and licked it. I didn't want her to give me head because I was afraid I would come immediately, and she was so passionate. I wanted to put it in her. I put her on the bed and got over her and gradually put it in, and it felt wonderful. She was so tight and moist. I finally got all the way in, which was hard to do at first because she was small, but she was completely turned on. I kissed her breast and she kept hollering, "I love you. You're the most beautiful man in the world. This is the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'll never forget this moment as long as I live." And I thought, wow, this is my fan club and there's 4 of them. Usually when I'd ball the chicks that hung around the band, the minute it was over, I'd have to leave. I'd have to get away from the girl because after my need for sex was satisfied, I couldn't stand her. Her smell on my body was like a curse on me, and I'd have to wash myself and scrub because I felt so dirty. But this girl was so sweet that I felt some love and warmth for her. So later I really felt guilty, 1,000,000 times more guilty. Because I felt like cuddling this girl, because I cared for this girl, I'd really betrayed Patty.